Hello, everybody. Welcome to this lesson, Technical Issue for Education on the Web, Platform Open Data and Open License is license. It's lesson number 8. For starting, I want to introduce myself. My name is Mario Antas, and I hold a PhD with expertise in educational communication in museums. And currently I'm between jobs. I'm working until last week on the National Museum of Archaeology, and in the next week I will working in the National Coach Museum in Lisbon, Portugal. I'm also a teacher in the Department of Museology in the University Lusófona of Humanities and Technologies in Lisbon. I teach museums and education. I was ICOM Portugal board member during 8 years, from 2012 until 2020, and I was the European Coordinator of ICOM-CECA from 2016 until 2019. And I have been invited expert in several seminars of the Council of Europe, and as well team coordinator in several European projects financed by European Union, such as IMI, Eurovision Museums Exhibiting Europe, and 𝙃.𝙀, Museums and Communities. So today I'm here to talk with you a little bit about educational tools, of course, and the questions related with open access and open data. So I would like to talk about these questions and much more things as well, such as how museum mediators can operate in these levels with these skills and try to do their jobs in an online way. So the lesson plan that I want to share with you today is mediation in museums in COVID times, shifting the presence from presence models of mediation to online mediation. Of course, this new world of educational resources that we are exploring in these several lessons here in the H.E.L.P project, open license and open platforms, and one example of best practice, the 𝙃 Museums project. For starting, of course, we are living and we are unfortunately facing the problem of COVID-19 pandemic crisis. And there is this problem, and there is no family in the world that was not affected with this crisis. So pandemic crisis change the world that we are living, and of course the human relations changed, and of course museums changes as well. From one day to the other, we saw and we felt that our world changed. Everybody had to be locked down at homes, and everybody had to stop working, and of course museums closed, and for us it was a different world. So it was really hard for us because we know our families, our friends has been affected with this pandemic crisis. It was and still is a very important issue in our lives, and the consequences of this crisis are still today. So all around the world, several experts and several organizations are trying to understand the effects of COVID-19 and especially in museums. I just want to share with you uh, an UNESCO report from April from this year that states and quoted something like this: in 2020, museums were closed for an average of 155 days. And since the beginning of 2021, many of them have again had to shut their doors, resulting on average in a 70% drop in attendance and a 40-60% decline in the revenue compared with 2019. So this is very important to understand because the majority of museums have been closed with no revenues, and especially with a huge drop off in attendance. So our visitors, museums, have nowadays facing the problem of the visitors, lack of visitors. So this question is transversal to museums in all the world, and you see in the right side of your screen one comparing table of the percentage that change the visitor numbers in the world in the 10 most visited art museums. If you look, a drop of 83% in Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and 82%, 81% in Vatican museums, or 80% in British Museum in London. And you see a lot of this drop, 72% in the Louvre Museum. So there are a huge drop of visitors among museums around the world. Of course, in terms of education, the museum mediators had to face this big problem as well. And I want to share with you this image. It can be any museum in the world. I just picked Louvre Museum to show the difference between one museum full of people, full of joy, full of happiness, and one museum with no people, no joy, and absolutely full of silence and without any persons. So this drama was present in museums all around the world, because museums are about people, are about people's life. And without people, museums are nothing. So I just also to share with you another report from November 2020 from ICOM. And this report traces the situation of the museums in the world. Is the second report, actually, is the report, the follow-up survey about what was going on in museums in the world. And I just want to focus about the answer of the museums to this big crisis. And the answer was more focused in digital solutions. You can see once more in the right part of the screen that when we question what kind of digital service that your museum provides, you can see, for instance, several types of services like collection online, exhibitions online, live events, learning programs, newsletters, podcasts, social media, among others. And on this graphic information, you can see that majority of museums are very focused on this problem. And you can see in the green bar that social media increase in 41%, during and after, especially after the lockdown. So this is very important. The museums, of course, have their social media, but with the pandemic crisis, we registered an increase after the lockdown. And of course, if you go further in this or go deeper in this analysis, you see that live events and learning programs grow in a percentage between 70% and 24% on the museums around the world. So, as we can see on these graphics, museums had to adapt and adapt in the very quick time, in the very short time. Of course, that's continuing on this analysis, museums, when we ask museums, which of the following digital changes is your museum considering to do after the lockdown? You can see that majority of answers say several things, very important. Rethinking the digital strategy with 76%, or increased digital offers for 74%, and of course, also training of staff. If we look closer to these two indicators, increasing of digital offer and rethinking digital strategy, there are very important tasks because majority of the museums before the lockdown didn't have a digital strategy. They have, of course, social media, but they don't think in a digital way. They don't have a very developed strategy, digital strategy, and the digital offer was not very variated, which means the digital offer was poor in the majority of museums as well. So, of course, with this COVID-19 pandemic crisis and the lockdown, the world moved to online. And of course, the museums have to adapt to this new kind of educational mediation. Talking about educational mediation is very important because majority of researchers on this field are seeing and are stating that we are changing from one-site mediation that we called online mediation. Of course, that I just want to stress several things. Museums, majority of mediators in museums, of course, work in the museums and develop strategy based on real object museums and especially in face-to-face interaction strategies. That's the day life for mediators in museums when museums are open. Of course, with this pandemic crisis, we changed for a blended mediation, like blended learning. And in this case, combining strategies based on real museum objects and multimedia content and trying to engage people with a virtual experience in the real context. Not only on pandemic crisis, but also in these times post COVID-19. And just want to stress that the situation of COVID-19 in the world is very different in different countries. For instance, nowadays, some countries are open to museums and in other countries they are not open. So these blended learning strategies or blended mediation is very present in nowadays. And of course, that's what some researchers call online mediation strategy based on virtual objects and multimedia content, virtual experience in the virtual world. Of course, the museum and the strategy of mediation are present in these three types. And of course, all the researchers in educational, about education in museums are shifting from this kind of mediation, from one-side mediation to blended mediation and online mediation. So I just want to bring these ideas to share with you about the paths that we are walking in this moment. And of course, when we talk about mediation, of course, we talk about learning theories. And I think that the majority of us know this wonderful work made by Richard Milhood about all the strategies of the majority of educational theories in the world, and researchers in this in the world right now are focusing are about learning theories in museums, of course, based and connected with this kind of mediation in online, on-site, and blended mediation. In previous lessons, my colleague, especially my colleague Ines Camera, talked about learning theories and the role of mediators in museums. Of course, about the world is changing and museums are changing. I just want to quote Eric Falt, director and UNESCO representative in the commemorations of celebrations of International Day of Museums in New Delhi. When we talk about museums, we are talking about facilitating our progress based on 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, that the museum is important on this field. When we look to this sentence, you see that an inclusive, informed, and participatory museum policy in digital age is the first step towards pandemic recovery in this area. So museums have to be a presence in digital era and have to communicate it by these channels. Another research, very recent, about two Korean colleagues, two Korean researchers in educational field, Choi and King, states that with the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, the relations, of course, changed. And of course, in this situation, the most important trend is digital. Majority of museums close their physical spaces, but museums had to look for another channels of communication with the users. And of course, museums have to develop new kinds of communication, especially to create digital networks, to talk with visitors and talk and to engage. More than talking is to engage with users. So museums had to reinvent themselves in order to achieve the publics. Of course, that it was a huge challenge for the museums. And of course, mediators in museums have to produce new educational resources. But the question is, how can we move from one side mediation using educational resources for one line mediation using educational resources in a digital way? And for that, museums had to adapt in a very short time. Of course, new technologies provide the possibility to expose cultural heritage in different digital platforms, but digitized material from museums can be used and reused to develop, among others, learning and educational content, documentary, animations and design tools, and so on. What we meant with this, that museums are producers of educational resources. And it's just not for producing, it's just not the way to produce resources in a digital way, but the main question, the main focus is how to produce it and what rules that we must follow to produce these educational resources. And of course, when we think about the reuse of data, we can say that it is only possible if the digitized data is open, which means that the end users can reuse and, in some cases, distribute the data after that. So, in this sense, the reuse of cultural data the material must be, for one hand, digitized, published online, and for the other hand, must be open, which means that data can be freely used, reused, and redistributed by anyone. And that's why that we need to talk about open licenses. And there are different types of open licenses. In this lecture, we just want to focus on the most known licenses like Creative Commons licenses. And this license gives the opportunity to everyone, from individual creators to large institutions, in the standardized way to grant the public permission to use their creative work under copyright law. In this case, from the reuser perspective, the presence of a Creative Commons license on the copyrighted work answers the question, and is very important, this question. What can I do with this work? And this is a general overview of the most common and the most known licenses. Just looking to this infographic, we can see that there are more open licenses and more restricted license. On the green color is the most free and open licenses, and in the red there is the most restrictive license. But we can look deeper in these licenses and what we are talking about when we ask permission for using one work. So, starting with the most free and the most open licenses, we have this license is CC BY that allow users to distribute, remix, adapt, and build upon material in any medium formats, as long the attribution is given to the creator. So that's why we have these symbols, and the credit must be given to the creator. Is the most open licenses. And we have the second type of license is CC BY SA, that this license allows reusers to distribute, remix, adapt, and even build upon the material in any medium or format. And of course, in this case, the credit must be given to the creator, and the adaptations must be shared under the same terms. And we are traveling among these licenses. In this third license, we CC by NC. The license allows to reusers to distribute, remix, adapt, and build upon the material of any medium format for non-commercial purpose only, and only so long as attribution is given to the creator. So, only for non-commercial uses of work are permitted. For instance, like educational activities in museums. That's the most common license used when we're talking about creating educational materials in museums. And we have also CC by NCAA, which is another type of license that credit must be given to the creator, of course, only for non-commercial use, and adaptations must be shared in the same terms. And the most restricted licenses are CC by ND, and in these licenses, of course, reusers can copy and distribute the material, of course, also giving the credits to the creator, but no derivatives or adaptations of the work are permitted. And the most restricted license is CC by NCND. And this license credit must be given to the creator, of course, only for non-commercial uses, and no derivation and no adaptations of the work is permitted. So there are many kinds of licenses, but these 6 categories are the most known. And of course, there also the CC0, and the CC0, it's what we call the public domain, is a public dedication tool that allows creators to give up their copyrights and put their works into the worldwide public domain. So users can, or reusers in this case, can distribute, remix, adapt, or build upon the material in any medium or format with no conditions. With this question of license, is very important that when we are sharing our work, we need to choose very wisely the license that we are thinking about. Before licensing and applying a CC license or a CC0 to our work, we have to consider 2 questions, main questions. First, the license and CC0 cannot be revoked, which means that once you apply a CC license to your material, anyone who receives it may rely on this license as long as the material is protected by copyright. Second, you must own or control the copyright in your work, which means that that you are trying to license a work, you have to have the control of all the image and all the things and all the materials that you produce before. So these 2 questions are very important when we talk about licensing some work. And of course, that you are free to share and free to adapt. And of course, that you need to just go and pick more attention to the terms, especially the terms of attribution of the work. So about Creative Commons licenses are very important when we are sharing work, especially when we are sharing online your work. and we are, for instance, producing educational resources for the museum. And of course, when we talk about licensing your work or licensing that educational resources that you produce for your museum, we are talking about open data. And majority of people have heard talk about open data. But what is really open data? Open data is the data that anyone can access, use, or share. And of course, open data must be usable, and open data must be licensed. And of course, that the question is the most important. When you're talking about open data, we have to understand that open data must be licensed, and that's why we talk about this license, in this case, Creative Commons license. It's very important for people understand that they can use the data and under which terms in this case. And of course, what marks data open, which means that we need to understand which data or how people can use the data. And of course, majority of people want to use, modify, and combine and share data to understand better what and to share with different publics. So when we talk about open data, we are talking about giving permission to people to share our work. And of course, the question of restrictions is very important. When we put some kind of restrictions in the use of open data, we are limiting the potential of creation. And this is a very important question. And of course, the museums are trying to develop free open data tools. And this is the main question during the lockdowns and during, of course, this COVID-19 pandemic crisis around the world. So I just want to share with you, when we talk about open data, this what we called open GLAM. GLAM, galleries, archives, libraries, and museums. And of course, this project is about establishing a global network on sharing cultural heritage. And these questions are very important for museums and all the GLAM develop the resources and share in a broader way. But for this lesson, I also want to talk about tools and platforms that can be used by museums for educational purposes. Of course, there are plenty of tools and platforms that museums professionals and museum mediators can use for educational purpose. And the main question is to choose. And of course, that is a very important task when you talk about open license and open data. About open license and especially about Creative Commons license, I just want to stress that in H.E.L.P project, we will have a specific lesson, will be lesson number 10 by 𝗏.𝗀.𝗏 that will go to talk more deeply about the question of open licenses and especially Creative Commons licenses. So, when we talk about platforms and open platforms that we can use in museums, there are a huge range of platforms. The most of them we use it nowadays. For instance, Zoom platforms, Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, everybody is using these platforms, these online virtual meeting platforms, in these cases, to share and to communicate and even to present and get engaged with other museum professionals and with visitors. So nowadays, these platforms are our daily life. And of course, there is also other kind of platforms like Google Forms and Google Classroom, for instance, that allow us to make a lot of creation and online creation, and these are collaborative platforms, and majority of us know these platforms. There are also other kind of platforms, and H.E.L.P projects identify best practice in several museums using different kind of platforms. And there are these kind of platforms, collaborative platforms, online gamified quizzes like Quizy or Kahoot, about online gamified quizzes and or Padlets for collaboration presentation, or Mural, etc. There are a lot of platforms that we can use for educational purpose and to use it to communicate with our visitors and communicate with our audiences in a broader way. So the main effort of museum mediators was to adapt and to use all these platforms in a very clever way in order to reach their own audience, to reach their own publics. And for this, I would just want to share, when we talk in the beginning of this lesson about blended mediation and this kind of using new platforms in presential way in the museum, that we can use this kind of resources not only in the virtual way, but also in our museum. And just want to show you this video about using some kind of these resources. Okay, it was a very short movie, and it was we can understand very clear. So how can we use these platforms in the context of museum exhibition? Of course, there are different kind of platforms. Most of them we know it, but some we don't. We are not very used to use it. For instance, we know that we know YouTube, but some of us can also use YouTube video editor tools, for instance. 𝗏 is also an online image editor, very interesting. So there are a lot of platforms that we can use for educational purpose. And of course, there are different kind of platforms and therefore different goals. For instance, majority of people knows Minecraft, for instance, but we can also use these kind of platforms to make and to think outside the box, and create new resources for our museums in order to reach our publics and to reach different audiences. And these are the main questions and the main goals and nowadays for museum mediators in museums all around the world. And of course that we can use these platforms, and I just want to show you another example of using platforms and using new technologies, in this case augmented reality, virtual reality, and just want to show you the potential of these platforms and the potential of new technology in museums.
It is more than just a digital or a virtual guide within the museum. It provides augmented reality experience, it provides gamification, and it also does a kind of a reenactment of past incidents. So it's a mixed reality experience that we'll be able to bring into the context of physical exhibits within the museum. And this is just really the tip of the iceberg, that we'll be able to transform the future of museum going experience to make it a little bit more immersive, more interactive, and more intelligent. First-hand experience is one of the most powerful way of learning. So if we be able to change the way people look at things or get engaged, then we'll be able to really make the whole museum experience very different.
It was another small video about the use of new technologies, in this case in museum. Of course, we are talking about different things over here, but we are also talking about the use of digital platforms and the use of digital resources and tools, because museums are nowadays more used to use these technologies. And talking about technologies, for instance, some museums are using 3D modeling as well, and 3D objects, and sharing their collections in a 3D way. And of course, 3D allow us a lot of potential for our collection and to show, especially in this pandemic crisis, to show the objects in a 3D way allows to reach different audiences as well. So in this case, we are talking about many things that and many resources that we can use in our museums. And there are many platforms, as you can see here, that we understand and we can use and in our education resources in the museums. So, but the main question is not only for showing different platforms and different tools that we can use to reach our publics, and the question is how to do it. So when we look to this lesson, we started to trace the questions about pandemic crisis and how the museums had to adapt themselves in the educational way. And we talk about open licenses and the importance of open data. And we talk about different resources of education. And now I just want to present you a case study. And this case study is connected with the 𝙁 Museums project. And this project was developed on the frame of European Union. It was financed by European Union, and this project put together and bring together institutions, universities and museums from Europe, University of St. Andrews in Scotland, ICOM in France, University of Valencia in Spain, the National Museum of Archaeology in Portugal, the University of West Indies in Jamaica and Barbados, and the National Museum of History in Costa Rica, and the Pontificia Catholic University in Peru, and the University of Chile, or the University Austral of Chile. So this consortium and this team of researchers and museum professionals developed a work focus on the small communities and small museums. And the conceptual model puts in the middle the museum and the questions related with identity, territory, people, and community. But more important in this project was the fact that the project was a huge example about how to use technologies to reach the public and how to use open data and how to create content in open data and to share with a huge community. Just once more to share a small video about the project for better understanding about 𝚤𝙁 project. As we saw on this video, this project was about people, really real communities working and making activities on the museums and developing educational resources. And of course, when we talk about what kind of resources, we are talking about a huge quantity and variety of resources. For instance, this project created a community database of community museums. Uh, More than 100 museums, community museums around the world, and are present in this database. And of course, we in this project there is also a database of tangible and intangible heritage, and all of these databases are free to use, and they are built and made on purpose for this project that bring together museums from Europe, from Caribbean region, and from South America region. So it was a huge project with that produced a lot of resources, and all of these resources are open data, and that is very important nowadays. And of course, uh, there are different types of resources produced by this project, like virtual exhibitions, and a lot of documents that anybody can use in different museums around the world. The main word for this project was to share for us to understand better other museums around the world. Of course, in this project have been produced many videos. They are all available on YouTube, for instance. Many videos, many open seminars, and of course, the YouTube channel of this project is more than 100 videos produced in museums around the world, from Scotland to Chile, Peru, Portugal, Spain, and so on. there are many resources that this project can made. And for that, I just want to share another small video. This is more focused in the work of kids and communities in a museum. Just take a look on this video. So with this video, I'm finishing this presentation just to say that 𝚘 Museums project is just an example how museums, researchers and mediators can use online educational resources in a different way to produce content using different platforms. And this project was very interesting because this project started in 2016 and finished in 2021 and reached more than 1 million persons and involving more than 100 museums. So this example of best practice, in this case, by producing educational resources online in open data to provide people and researchers in the world the opportunity to understand and know better the work made by museum communities in other parts of the world is very interesting. That's why I bring this example for here. Of course, with this example, we understand that we say that museum change lives. And of course, that education changes people, and museums are people. That's why we are museums. And with these last words, I just want to thank 𝗂𝗚 project, and especially to thank 𝗂𝗋 project for us to understand better the museums and to understand how can we share educational resources in museums, because sharing and sharing is the key for better understand museums through education. Thank you very much.